The lights from the stage were hot against my skin, the polished wood of the podium gleaming under them. My name echoed through the hall, Rowena Mercer, and polite applause rose from the audience as I stepped forward to receive my MBA diploma. I smiled for the camera, holding the folder just as the photographer instructed, but my eyes drifted to the right. The row reserved for my family sat in plain view, empty. It shouldn't have surprised me. Still, the sight struck something deep, a hollow thud inside my chest. I'd held on to a faint, foolish hope that maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd set aside whatever excuse they'd conjured up and show up for me. But the empty seats told the truth, just like they had at every other milestone in their absence. Memories filled the gap. My 16th birthday, when Belle got a weekend trip to New York for a once-in-a-lifetime dance workshop, while I got a store-bought cake left on the kitchen counter. My high school graduation, when my parents arrived late because they had to drive Belle to a photo shoot. The scholarship dinner I attended alone, because it's just a formality and they didn't want to take the evening off work. Belle was 3 years younger, their golden child. Every one of her whims became a project the whole family rallied behind. My dreams, on the other hand, were met with reminders to be practical, self-sufficient, and not expect handouts. Toughen up, Rowena, my father used to say, as if resilience were a coat you could pull on at will. The dean's handshake lingered just long enough to pull me back to the present. I walked off the stage to the applause of strangers, returning to my seat among the other graduates, the weight of my diploma heavy in my lap. Around me, classmates leaned into their cheering families, cameras flashing, flowers exchanged. I kept my hands folded and my face neutral, already rehearsing the answer I'd give later when someone asked, "Were your family here?" When the ceremony ended, and I stepped out into the crisp spring air, my phone began to buzz. I was halfway down the steps outside Low Memorial Library, diploma still tucked under my arm. When my phone buzzed again, the number was unfamiliar, main area code. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the timing made me swipe to answer. "Ms. Mercer," the voice was deep, measured. "This is Elliot Brandt, attorney for the Lewis estate in Harbor Bay. I'm calling regarding your grandparents' affairs." My breath caught. My grandparents, I hadn't heard their names, Thomas and Evelyn Lewis, spoken aloud in months, not since the quiet memorial service I'd organized mostly by myself. "Yes," he continued, "as their sole heir, you've inherited their property and investments. We'll need to meet soon to go over details, but I can tell you now the current estate value is approximately $1 million. I stopped moving. Around me, graduates laughed and posed for photos, but the words $1 million seemed to pull the sound out of the air. I wasn't thinking about the number so much as the fact that they had chosen me deliberately, unequivocally. Images came unbidden. My grandfather in worn flannel, teaching me how to fix a loose fence post, my grandmother's hands dusted with flour as we rolled pie crust on the old kitchen counter, the two of them reading side by side on the porch, the ocean just beyond the rose garden. From high school through their final years, I'd been the one driving up on weekends, mowing the lawn, replacing light bulbs, sorting their mail. They never asked for much, just company and help with small things they could no longer do. My parents and Belle rarely came, except for Thanksgiving photos or a quick stop on the way to somewhere else. "Ms. Mercer," Elliot's voice brought me back. "If you can be in Harbor Bay this week, we'll begin transferring control to you." "Yes," I said, the word firm. "I'll come." We exchanged details, and I ended the call, tucking the phone back into my bag. The spring wind carried a faint chill, but it wasn't the cold that made me tighten my grip on my diploma. It was the sudden awareness that this gift came with a shadow. I knew my family well enough to understand what would happen once they found out. And I wasn't going to wait for that day to arrive unprepared. 2 days after the call from Elliot Brandt, I was seated in a glass-walled office in downtown Portland across from Damon Clay, a trust attorney recommended by a former classmate. Damon was in his mid-40s, calm-eyed, the kind of man who spoke sparingly but left no doubt about his meaning. After listening to me outline my family's history, how borrowing in their vocabulary meant gone forever, and helping manage was just a step toward taking, he leaned back in his chair. If you want to make this airtight, he said, an irrevocable trust is your best option. Once it's set, no one, not even you, can pull the assets back into your personal name. They'll be beyond public reach, and you'll be the sole trustee. It sounded final, and maybe a little ruthless, but finality was what I needed. We spent the next 3 weeks in a blur of signatures, transfers, and sealed envelopes. Damon arranged for an LLC owned by the trust to take title to the Harbor Bay property. Every utility account, every tax record, every insurance policy shifted under that entity's name. The investment accounts my grandparents left were closed. The funds moved into trust-managed holdings with dual authentication access only Damon and I controlled. The paper trail disappeared from Maine. Copies of the original documents went into a locked file at Damon's office and a safe deposit box in Boston, far from anyone in my family. I didn't tell a soul, not even my closest friends. The fewer people who knew, the fewer loose threads for my family to tug at. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I caught myself wondering if this made me cold, cutting them out so completely, preemptively, without a word. It was a kind of severing that couldn't be undone. But then I remembered every time they'd watched me scramble to cover my own tuition, every missed milestone, every ill-managed tossed over their shoulders as they walked away. And I realized cold was exactly what had kept me alive in that house for years. By the time Elliot called to say the estate transfer was officially complete, the lock was already in place. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to discover it. It started subtly, almost as if they'd all agreed to the same script. A text from Belle. Saw you were in Harbor Bay last weekend. Thought I might stop by sometime. We should catch up. A call from my mother, her voice overly warm, asking how work was going and whether I'd had time to think about the future of the house. The first weekend I was back at the estate, my father appeared in the driveway with a toolbox, claiming he'd noticed the porch railing looked loose the last time he drove by. He offered to fix it up, no charge. I told him I had it handled. Belle was more persistent. She'd drop by with a tin of cookies or a bundle of flowers, drifting through the rooms with that bright smile, asking questions that sounded casual, but weren't. Do you still keep the deed in the house? Just curious, I've never actually seen it. I'd change the subject every time. At dinner one evening in their kitchen, my mother set down a roast chicken and launched into a speech about keeping family property in the family, glancing at me as if I might spontaneously offer to split the inheritance. Belle chimed in about how much she'd always loved the place, how she could see herself living there, maybe even renovating it. I smiled, nodded, and offered nothing. Each visit, each phone call was a slow press against the edges of my boundaries, testing for weakness. They thought I was still the daughter who could be worn down with enough insistence, the sister who'd give in to keep the peace. But I made sure to answer every probing remark with a vague, agreeable hum, giving them the illusion that I hadn't fortified the ground they were so eager to claim. Their patience was just as calculated as mine. And I knew eventually one of us would decide it was time to make the next move. The morning air was sharp enough to sting my lungs as I swept a scatter of maple leaves off the porch. The ocean was restless that day, a low rumble under the steady cry of gulls. I'd just leaned the broom against the railing when a familiar black SUV turned into the drive, crunching over the gravel. Belle stepped out first, hair perfectly tied back, her expression bright with the kind of confidence that usually meant she thought she'd already won. My parents followed, my mother clutching a slim folder, my father moving with that slow, deliberate stride he used when he wanted to look in control. "Morning, Ro," Belle called, striding toward me. "I just wanted to let you know, this house is in my name now." She said it in a single breath, like she couldn't wait to drop the news. "Mom and Dad think it's best if you move out this week. I already have a potential buyer." I didn't flinch. "Really?" My father stepped forward, pulling a sheath of papers from the folder. "Your grandparents will had an error. Technically, the property should have been left to both you and your sister. We've worked with a lawyer to correct it, and we've transferred title to Belle, so it's easier to manage." He held the papers out to me, as if expecting I'd take them with gratitude. I glanced down. At first glance, they could have fooled someone who didn't know what to look for. A blue ink seal in the corner, signatures in looping script, But the seal design was wrong, the notary stamp number incomplete, and the signature shaky, inconsistent. Belle smiled like a realtor about to close a deal. "Don't worry, I'll handle everything. We can get movers here in a week." I let the moment stretch, watching the certainty in their eyes, storing every detail, the date printed at the top, the name of the so-called notary, even the faint watermark that didn't match county records. "I've heard you," I said finally, my voice even. Then I stepped back, letting them think they'd planted their flag. They left, looking satisfied. I stayed on the porch until the SUV disappeared, already knowing I wouldn't have to wait long for their next move. 2 days later, the crunch of tires on gravel came earlier than I expected. A white moving truck rolled up first, the black SUV trailing close behind. From the passenger seat, Belle hopped out in a fitted tracksuit, phone in hand, eyes alight with anticipation. My parents followed, my father with a fixed smile, my mother already gesturing toward the porch as if directing a stage play. Behind me, Mark Ellery, the county property official, stood in a neatly pressed navy suit, a leather folder tucked under one arm. We'd spoken the night before. He'd reviewed every document in the trust and agreed to meet here in person. Now he waited, silent and steady, while I folded my arms across my chest. The movers had barely made it to the walkway when they slowed, taking in the scene. My father tried to keep moving forward, papers in hand, but Mark stepped into view, opening his folder and withdrawing a document stamped with the county seal. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, Ms. Belle Mercer," he said, voice clear enough to carry to the truck, "I'm here on behalf of the County Property Records Office. As of last April, this property was transferred into an irrevocable trust under the sole trusteeship of Ms. Rowena Mercer. Any transfer of ownership attempted after that date is legally void and may constitute fraud." Belle blinked rapidly. "Fraud?" "We corrected a mistake in the will." Mark didn't even glance at her. "Our records show the paperwork you filed used an unlicensed notary and was processed through an out-of-state service flagged for fraudulent filings. This is your official warning. Any further attempt to claim this property without authorization will be referred for criminal investigation." The movers exchanged looks, then began backing toward their truck. My mother's lips pressed into a tight line. My father folded the papers slowly, as if buying time, before turning sharply toward the SUV. Belle lingered a moment longer, her expression hardening. "You'll regret this," she said under her breath. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. When their engines faded down the road, Mark handed me my copy of the notice, his eyes steady. "They won't forget this." Neither would I, and I knew the quiet that followed wouldn't last. 3 mornings after the porch confrontation, I found a thick envelope wedged in my apartment mailbox. The return address belonged to a law firm in Portland I'd never heard of, but the name on the line beneath was instantly familiar: Sylvia Mercer. Inside was a 4-page letter printed on heavy cream paper. The language was polished, but the demands were anything but subtle. $150,000 in cash as emotional compensation, joint ownership of the Harbor Bay property with Belle, and a monthly stipend until further notice to ensure the family's long-term well-being. The letter accused me of causing irreparable harm to maternal and sibling bonds by keeping the estate entirely in my name. I read it twice, then set it aside and reached for my phone. If they wanted to take this into the legal arena, I'd meet them there. Selena Voss agreed to see me that afternoon. Her office was on the 15th floor of a downtown building, the walls lined with framed trust and estate case victories. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the letter, the forged documents, and the attempted takeover at the house. Her response was immediate. "We send a cease and desist, direct, documented, and final. They have no claim, not with that trust in place. And we find proof of who filed those forged papers." Within 48 hours, the letter was on its way to my mother's attorney and her home address. It cited the trust's legal protections, warned against further harassment, and made it clear that any future attempts would trigger civil and potentially criminal action. Selena's investigator didn't take long to find the trail. The forged transfer had been submitted through a property filing service flagged in multiple states for fraudulent activity. The name attached to the submission: Belle Mercer. The notary seal number didn't exist in the state registry. Seeing it in black and white left me with a cold, steady anger. The county official's warning on the porch had been generous. They could have walked away. Instead, they doubled down. I left Selena's office with the report tucked in my bag, wondering if maybe this would be enough to stop them. But deep down, I knew my family too well to believe it was over. The first sign came from an unexpected place. A text from my cousin Maris. "You need to hear this." She sent over an audio file, and my mother's voice filled my kitchen, low and deliberate. "I don't want to speak badly about her," Sylvia said, "but Rowena took advantage of Dad when he was weak. Everyone knows he wasn't thinking clearly when he signed those papers." Maris didn't stop there. Screenshots from a group chat followed, my mother spinning the same story to a circle of relatives, with bell chiming in about family fairness and hidden motives. A few cousins even piled on, speculating about me forging signatures, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. I sent it all to Selena. She didn't hesitate. "They're trying to turn this into a reputational war. If you let this stick, every move you make will be seen through that lens. We fight back with facts, publicly." For 2 days, we built a 12-page statement of facts, every date and document lined up, the trust's creation, the property transfer, the fraudulent filing trail with Belle's name on it, and the county's records disproving every accusation. I sent it to every relative in that group chat and to anyone my mother had tried to sway. The subject line was simple: the full truth. Apologies began trickling in within hours. Some were brief, just a few words, acknowledging they'd been wrong. Others came with long explanations about how convincing my mother had sounded. Not everyone changed their mind. A handful doubled down, accusing me of airing family business. But the momentum had shifted. The lies no longer stood unchallenged. By the end of the week, the silence from my mother's camp felt heavier than any reply. I knew they were regrouping. News of Belle's new job came from a mutual acquaintance who thought it was great we were both doing well. A quick search confirmed it. She'd joined a luxury real estate firm known for touting ethics and client trust. I didn't waste time. Selena and I compiled the forged transfer documents, the invalid notary seal verification, and the county's fraud warning into a single indexed file. I sent it to the firm's ethics department with a short note. "This concerns your employee, Belle Mercer, and her involvement in attempted property fraud." 3 days later, the firm terminated her. The case was forwarded to the state licensing board, which opened a formal review. That's when the counterattack came. Belle hired a lawyer with a reputation for aggressive PR spin. He framed my actions as malicious interference in a young professional's career, feeding sympathetic quotes to a local business blog. Selena was ready. We sent the licensing board certified copies of every court-stamped document, including the cease and desist letter, the investigative report tying the fraudulent filing to Belle, and the county's statement from the porch confrontation. The board acknowledged receipt, confirming the evidence would remain in the case record. The PR noise fizzled once the facts were on the table. I could almost hear the silence from their side, tight, calculated, waiting for the next angle. I knew it would come, and I knew I couldn't afford to look away when it did. 2 months later, a plain white envelope arrived, the return address from a Salem law firm. Inside, the letter was brief: all claims against me withdrawn, no further contact to be made except where legally necessary. I read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in my file. No triumph, no gloating, just the quiet certainty that a chapter had closed. That weekend, I drove to Harbor Bay. The gravel road curved toward the house, maple leaves blazing in autumn colors, the sea stretching silver beyond. Inside, the air held the faint scent of aged wood and the lavender diffuser I'd left months ago. I walked through each room slowly, my hand brushing the red brick walls, the photographs, the worn armchair by the window. In the stillness, my grandfather's voice seemed to echo, "Protect what's worth keeping." I understood now he'd meant more than the property. It was my right to choose who could reach me, my ability to keep my dignity intact, my peace unbroken. On the porch, I looked out at the horizon until the light began to fade, knowing I would decide which doors stayed closed from here on.